Okay, there we go. This is John Gonder for all the classes that are using NetLab with some tips and hiccups and talking about maybe sometimes when something doesn't work as expected. And of course, that's when you show your ability to actually think and just keep going. Because, of course, you know, in the real world, if your boss gives you a list of 10 things to do and you get to the second one and for some reason you're not able to complete it, do you stop or do you complete the rest of the list? Yeah, that's a no-brainer. Of course, I've gone over this before in most classes. Some of the NetLab glitches that are most likely to happen really have to do with your spelling, P's and Q's, you know. Commas versus periods, colons versus semicolons. It's really easy for us to overlook those things, and we'll look at a couple examples of that in the demonstration I'm about to do. And then, of course, if you're having trouble, you can always log out of that virtual machine and then log back in again within your reservation. Or you could power cycle that virtual machine, or you could even completely exit that reservation and, you know, and cack all the machines and then come back in and have it reset the entire topology. Of course, that leaves you starting again from scratch, but sometimes that's a good thing to do. Worst case, I've had the case where we're having an actual problem with the NetLab system itself of some considerable size and make a new reservation, perhaps even on a different set of virtual machines. And then, of course, you're always wanting to document what's going on, especially when something goes wrong. You know, what you saw, what you did, what happened next. Because, for instance, if you're going to ask a question about that, you need to have a good description. If you're going to learn something from it, then you need to have good notes. Well, let's go on and do a little example here, and then we'll go through some tips about using NetLab. So I logged in, and it looks a little different from me, perhaps. I got a couple more choices than you do, but I'm going to make a new reservation here for myself. And it's going to be the similar thing. All the classes that you belong to are going to show listed. In my case, I belong to a lot. So I'm going to choose this one here, and for this example, we're going to use lab number 4, the Poison Ivy lab. And then, of course, over on the action here, I could preview the lab, and then I go ahead and I could schedule that lab. I'm going to go ahead and schedule that lab. And now, of course, there's different pods in the NetLab system. So these are different sets of gear. And like I said, it's been the case once in a while where a pod will be having trouble. And so if you get to the point where you need to make a new reservation, rather than just a later time on the same pod, go to a different pod that might not be being used. I'm going to go ahead and choose this pod here. And I'm going to make my reservation and submit that. And now I've got my scheduled reservation, and when I'm ready to go at the time that it's scheduled, I can go ahead and open that up, and then the system is going to initialize each of the virtual machines associated with the topology for the lab that I chose. Sometimes it takes a couple minutes, especially if there's a lot of Windows machines or some specialized equipment in the pod. And then when it's ready to go, of course, over on the right, that's how much time you have left. And starting from the left over here, that's the picture of the topology. And then this is the lab itself. Now, one recommendation I have is always to download that, because I like to have it in a separate window in a PDF viewer, rather than trying to go back and forth here between a virtual machine and this here on NetLab. So when I have it open in a PDF viewer, then for instance I can make that nice and big if I want. I can zero in on something and follow along. So back in NetLab here, then there's the status, which shows me for each individual virtual machine, numbers 1 through 8, the Windows Server, something else, a Linux, XP, Server 2003, Linux, and Windows 7. Obviously, this topology can be used for a number of different labs, and an individual lab may not use all these devices, may only use a couple. And then you've got a list of actions you could use for each individual one. Send a Control-Alt-Delete, because sending Control-Alt-Delete from your local keyboard doesn't work well. You can undock it, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Actual size, power on and power off, and take a screenshot of that device. So that can be handy if what you're being asked to do is to document. Sometimes you'll do a lab and you're being told, don't worry about documenting your lab because you're going to be graded based on the logs in NetLab. Or sometimes you might be told to take a screenshot of certain points in the lab itself. And then for each individual device, then there's those same choices by each individual device. Sometimes you're on a device that's logged in already. Sometimes you're on a device that you have to log into. Okay, so let's take a quick look at our lab here. So we're in the domain of hacking, Trojans, backdoors, viruses, worms. We've looked at topology. There's lab settings. The idea here is to set up Poison Ivy and configure that, create and launch a malicious file, get the victim to open that file, and then exploit that machine once we have access to it and look for a couple of things. And as typical, the lab settings will tell you which machines you're going to use, in this case just two, the XP Pro, its IP address, and then the account and password if you need that. Now here's a hint for you. That choice of undock can give you a larger window to look at, which can make it easier to see smaller things in that system, in the virtual machine that you're looking at. So if I'm over here and I'm going to log into this machine, VM8, which is one of the machines we're going to use. We already checked, and the name of that password is password. And we've logged into that. We can see it's relatively small. And if we open up a terminal window here, we can see that that terminal window is relatively small. And as is the case with Windows, the font is really hard to see. It's very thin. That's not ideal. So one of the choices we have is to undock this, and then it becomes something that we can move around independently of our other devices. You can see that already it looks like it's bigger. We can make it even bigger depending upon the screen that we're using. So that's pretty hip. Actual size is another choice. It keeps it here docked in the NetLab system, but it makes it bigger. You can choose what it is that you prefer to do, or scale the display. You can have multiple undocked systems, so each individual VM has a different window. You can arrange them so you can click into each individual VM, and that can be handy if you've got 2 or 3. If you have a lab that's really complex, you have 6 VMs, well, just make sure you don't get in trouble with that. I like to stack them up a little bit, offset just a little bit, so I can maximize the size of each one, and then easily click back and forth. Now, here's another tip for you, which is the actual terminal size. I've chosen 132 by 43 here in the backtrack. Notice I don't have a choice of font here in this setup in Backtrack, but that can help me make the terminal easier to read inside Backtrack. Inside the Windows command.exe windows, I can actually change the font by selecting Properties, right-clicking on the bar at the top, and then selecting Properties, and then selecting the font. Let's go and do that in this particular case here. So here we go. I'm going to right-click on the top here. I'm going to select Properties and Font. Now, I could even increase the cursor size, which can be handy too. And Font, and instead of that funky little 16, I'm going to make it 24. And that in this situation is a pretty good choice. I might end up with some things horizontally scrolling, but depending on the size of my system, I might be able to make that fit without horizontal scrolling. But at any rate, you have a choice of what you can do, and I really like having the font be somewhat bigger so I can really see when I'm trying to type something that's complex. Makes it a lot easier to see whether I'm typing a comma or a period or a semicolon or a colon, and avoid a lot of trouble. Here's another cool hint for you, which is I'm going to open Notepad. And while I don't necessarily need Notepad right now for something that's in the lab PDF, and I can actually even change the font from format inside Notepad to, instead of 10, be more like 18. So if I have a complex command that I need to type, I can do it here and copy that, and then I can go to my command window and I can paste that in. Right click and paste. What you're likely to have to do is to highlight this and right click, copy it, and then go here. Let me just get rid of this. CLS for clear screen is handy. And then I can right click and paste that. So here's my complex command, and if I go to use that and it's wrong, there's a typo and it's nice and long, rather than try to edit that inside the command window, it can be a lot easier to be able to edit that inside Notepad, and then once again right click and copy that, and then go right click and paste. So there you go. That's another cool tip for you to sort of save you hassle and a couple of brain cells. So to go over that in the command window, CLS is clear screen. Remember, the arrow key is going to bring up previous commands that you typed if you want to bring that up rather than type it again. And then using a couple of screenshots as you go, even if you don't have to turn anything in, can help you be able to verify what you actually typed or show you where your typo was versus what you actually think you typed. And then I talked about using a text editor to type in there, right click, copy, and then in the terminal right click and paste as being a handy thing, since it's easier to edit in the copier, in the text editor. Sort of perfect example of that is here in Poison Ivy Lab in this section 3. This, if you're viewing it as the natural size and it's not actual size or it's not undocked, can be pretty small, and it says carefully type. Yeah, and it's easy to, mistype some of this stuff that's very specific. And of course, next is like really down here. So when you're going through something for the first time, it can be very hard for you to figure out where actually it is, because sometimes there's arrows, or a lot of times there's arrows or indications, notations on the screenshots in the lab. But sometimes they're not sort of enough for somebody who's really doing this the first time. So just step by step, carefully, and if it doesn't work, then you just go back and you figure out, okay, so looking very carefully at what I did, what exactly did I type versus what I thought I did, and what did I actually click versus what I thought I clicked. Now, here's another example where, this word information, to indicate this, the information pane is actually fairly light, so it's not really jumping right at you. It's almost more clear that there's an information name over here, and if you keep hitting this and hitting refresh, it's not going to work. You have to be clicking inside this pane and then refresh. So here I've logged into the XP, and I've made the font large on the command prompt, and I've made a relatively large font on Notepad, and so I'm ready to go. So with relatively large font, it's going to be fairly straightforward to go through the steps here in this particular lab of generating some stuff and then saving it. You see you've got arrows here that tell you what to do, 1, 2, 3. Now, it gets a little bit small on what you're looking for, say at the top of this window, to say, are we actually listening, and on what port are we listening, and do we have any connections? And in this particular case for myself, because I had mistyped this the first time I did it, it didn't work. Notice there has to be a comma at the end. Yeah, I didn't have the comma at the end. So when I got down here, I'm like, wait a minute, why don't I have any connections? Well, one thing that we have had trouble with, I've seen a couple different times something similar to this, and in this particular lab 4.1, where you're going and then you're accessing services over on the attacked box. Once Poison Ivy is on the attacker box, is able to access the attacked box, you have a lot of choices of things to look at on the attacked box. One of the things is system information, and when you refresh that, you can see a lot of things. One of the things that we're supposed to do in terms of services in this particular lab is look at services, refresh that, and go down to look for the automatic update service on the target machine and turn that off. Now, I saw the last time I did this lab, I didn't see automatic update, and of course that's a problem, isn't it? Because I can't complete this particular task if I can't see this in services. Well, what was the first thing we said? When something doesn't work, then it's time to show your ability to think. Well, I don't see that service, so what does that mean? Maybe the service isn't running. So let me go over to that machine that I was trying to look at and look at the control panel and open up the system control panel and look at automatic updates, and what do I see? Automatic updates are not turned on this machine. So at some point in the past, this lab was created for a virtual machine that was configured to have automatic updates already on. So when we went ahead and attacked it, we would see automatic updates in the list of services. I don't see automatic updates in the list of services because automatic updates are not on. So what I might do here actually is take a screenshot, but in a sense I really don't need to worry about this, do I? Because, why? Well, because I'm already learning what it is that's the point. I've looked at the services, I'd be looking for this, I would be turning it off, and I could actually choose a different service and turn it off and see that same process where I turn off a service and then I can refresh and see that that service is stopped. It doesn't have to be this individual service if there's a problem with the system that automatic updates was not turned on. Now, if I rebooted that computer after setting automatic updates on, would that help me? No, because I can't permanently change that virtual machine image. When I reboot, it goes back to the image that was stored and comes back with automatic updates turned off. So if what I really wanted to do was practice stopping something and seeing that it stopped, I could choose anything else. I could just use my head a little bit. Okay, well, the point is to practice turning something off on the other machine that we're attacking. So there we go. And then that doesn't stop me. I can go right ahead on and do the rest of the jobs, which in this particular case has to do with going and getting the hashes and then dumping the hashes. So it can be good to always question your assumption. You know, if the picture here says automatic updates, well, that would be the case if it was turned on. And I went and I checked, and lo and behold, that image of XP that we're using doesn't have automatic updates on. So like I said, well, the process that we're learning here is to do the attack, find a service, turn the service off, screw around with the guy on the other end there, and then verify that I've been able to do that. So, and you can try it a couple times. If it doesn't work, document what happened, and then just keep going. And that's life in the real world. You'll come into a room full of gear and you'll have a long list of stuff to do, and there'll be a couple of things that just ain't gonna work. Well, that shouldn't keep you from completing the rest of what you need to do. Then in this case, go on to number 7 and get the hashes, and that should work, and there you go. Okay, well, so what's the bottom line? Go ahead and do the work. Sometimes it all works great. Sometimes it doesn't, and you've seen a couple of the examples of that. And use your tips and tricks to help you, especially in terms of being able to more easily see what you're typing in, so that some of those really microscopic typos like a comma missing or a colon instead of a semicolon can be a lot easier to see, and the whole thing becomes less frustrating. So there you go. That's some tips and tricks and assorted hiccups that you're going to see in NetLab. So have fun and enjoy. It's all about trying stuff out and having fun. And if something doesn't work right the first time, well, try something different. There you go. Enjoy, and we'll see you on the net.